Long before the kingdom of Haneul knew the name Yoon Seol, she was simply a 7-year-old girl running barefoot through the rice fields of Paeksu. Her family had little, but Seol never thought of herself as poor. Her father taught her that kindness was worth more than gold, while her mother filled her evenings with stories of ancient warrior women who had protected Haneul when kings and armies could not. Seol loved those stories. She would pick up fallen branches and pretend they were swords, racing through the fields while her mother laughed and warned her not to destroy the vegetables. It was a peaceful childhood, and then, one winter night, it ended. Raiders descended upon Paeksu while the village slept. Flames swallowed the wooden houses as terrified families fled toward the forest. Seol's father grabbed her hand, but somewhere in the smoke they were separated. Her mother screamed her name. Her father fought desperately to reach her, but there were too many men. Seol crawled beneath a broken cart and covered her mouth with both hands as she watched her parents being dragged away. She wanted to run after them. She wanted to scream. Instead, she remembered her father's words. Survive first, cry afterward. By sunrise, Paeksu was gone. Seol was discovered among the ruins and taken with the other surviving children. Before she could understand what was happening, she was sold into forced labor in the distant city of Namyun. The little girl who had once raced through rice fields now scrubbed floors until her fingers cracked. She carried water, cooked meals she was rarely allowed to eat, and learned quickly that wealthy households could be beautiful places filled with ugly hearts. Years passed. Seol was moved from one household to another, but something inside her refused to disappear. She watched, she listened, she remembered. One evening, while delivering food to a noble courtyard, she saw soldiers training. Seol stopped. Their swords moved exactly like the warriors from her mother's stories. That night, she found a broken wooden stick and copied everything she had seen. The next night, she practiced again. And the night after that, she believed no one knew. She was wrong. An elderly groundskeeper named Bae had been watching her from the shadows. To everyone else, old Master Bae was simply another servant with a bent back and weathered hands. But years earlier, he had belonged to a forgotten warrior clan. One night, he stepped into the alley and took the stick from Seol's hands. Again. Seol stared at him. He tossed it back. If you're going to hold a weapon, child, learn how to survive with it. From that night forward, Seol trained in secret. Master Bae never taught her to fight for glory. He taught her how to fall without breaking, how to listen before attacking, how to use an opponent's strength against him, and most importantly, how to survive when survival seemed impossible. Years later, when Seol was 15, she was selected with other servants to work inside the imperial palace. Master Bae watched her leave Namyun without saying much. Before she climbed onto the wagon, however, he placed an old strip of white cloth into her hand. Never let powerful people decide what you're worth. Seol carried those words with her all the way to the capital. She would need them sooner than she knew. The imperial palace was more beautiful than anything Seol had ever seen. It was also cruel in ways she immediately understood. The noble maids mocked her countryside accent and rough hands. Guards laughed whenever they caught her practicing behind the servant quarters. A maid pretending to be a warrior? Even trained men fail the army trials. Know your place. Seol never argued. She simply picked up her wooden staff and continued practicing after they left. Beyond the palace walls, however, something far more dangerous was growing. The northern empire of Daejeon was preparing for war. Reports arrived of soldiers gathering near the border, yet many of Haneul's generals dismissed the warnings. Only Emperor Jintae seemed concerned. Then one night, Daejeon brought the war directly into his palace. Seol was carrying lanterns through a quiet corridor when she heard steel strike steel. A guard collapsed around the corner. masked assassins rushed toward the emperor's chambers. Seol dropped the lanterns. She had no sword, so she grabbed the only weapon available, a servant's broom. The first assassin laughed when he saw her. He stopped laughing when the wooden handle struck his wrist. Seol twisted beneath his blade, took his weapon, and turned on the others. Years of secret training suddenly came alive. By the time palace guards arrived, several assassins were lying on the floor, and Seol stood between the survivors and Emperor Jin-tae. The emperor lived because of her. Seol expected nothing in return, but she never expected what happened next. The generals demanded her arrest. No ordinary maid should possess such skill, they argued. Perhaps the assassination had been staged. Perhaps she was secretly working for Daejin. The same people she had just saved dragged her beneath the palace and locked her inside a cell. Only Lady Mira, a compassionate palace attendant, believed her enough to listen. Night after night, Mira brought her food, and eventually Seol told her everything. Baesus, her parents, the slave traders, Master Bae, the years spent learning how to survive. Mira carried that story to Emperor Jin-tae. Before the emperor could decide Seol's fate, terrible news arrived. Daejin had crossed the border. Villages were burning. Thousands of soldiers were marching toward the capital. Haneul sent armies to stop them. Those armies fell. With every defeat, Emperor Jin-tae watched his proud commanders run out of answers. Finally, he ordered Seol brought from the dungeon. She entered the war chamber still wearing a servant's clothing. The generals erupted. One slammed his fist against the table. A servant girl cannot lead warriors. Another laughed. Perhaps she intends to fight Daejin with a broom. The room filled with laughter. Seol looked at the maps covering the table, and then at the men who had already lost battle after battle. If rank alone could protect Haneul, she said calmly, the enemy would already be dead. No one laughed again. Emperor Jin-tae made a desperate decision. He gave Yoon Seol command of the remaining forces. The maid they had imprisoned was now responsible for saving the kingdom that had never considered her worth protecting. Seol inherited only a few hundred exhausted soldiers. But she didn't ask them to believe she was special. She asked them to believe the mountains belonged to them. At Mount Soryeon, where narrow passages cut between frozen cliffs, Seol prepared her defense. She placed traps beneath the snow, positioned archers above the pass, loosened rocks along the cliffs and waited. When General Kuro's massive Daejin army entered the mountains, Seol struck. Rocks thundered down the cliffs. Fire arrows filled the sky. Hidden traps shattered enemy formations. For a brief moment, hundreds of Haneul soldiers held back thousands. Then numbers began to win. Daejin kept coming. One by one, Seol's soldiers fell. And when the royal generals saw the battle turning against them, they abandoned their positions and fled. Seol stayed. Soon, only a handful of soldiers remained around her. Then they too were overwhelmed. When Seol finally looked up, dozens of enemy spears surrounded her. General Kuro walked through the falling snow. His black armor was stained from battle as he studied the wounded young woman standing before him. So this is Haneul's great protector? His soldiers laughed. A stolen village girl pretending to be a warrior. One soldier struck Seol across the face with the shaft of his spear. Another knocked her to the ground. Seol tried to rise. Her body refused. Kuro raised his sword toward her throat. You were born weak, he told her. You should have died as a servant. For the first time in years, Seol was 7 again. She saw Baekso burning. She heard her mother screaming. She felt chains around her wrists. She remembered every floor she had scrubbed, every insult she had swallowed, and every person who had told her she was nothing. Perhaps they had been right. Perhaps this was where the forgotten were supposed to die. Seol lowered her head. Then she remembered Master Bae. Never let powerful people decide what you're worth. Seol pressed one trembling hand into the snow. No. Kuro frowned. Seol slowly lifted her head. I survived people stronger than you long before I ever held a sword. Kuro raised his weapon, and the mountain became silent. A strange wind swept across Mount Soryeon. Kuro stopped. White mist began curling around Seol's body. The enemy soldiers looked toward the mountain as shadowy figures appeared through the storm. Warriors, dozens of them, ancient guardians dressed in white robes and animal furs. Seol stared through tears as one spirit stepped forward carrying a crescent blade. She knew that woman. Her mother had told stories about her when Seol was a child, one of Haneul's legendary protectors. Then another figure emerged from the mist. Seol's breath caught. Master Bae? The old warrior smiled. Strength was never given to you, Seol. The spirits gathered behind him. It was always inside you. They reached toward her. White light exploded across the mountain. The wind roared. Enemy horses reared in terror. Seol's eyes opened. They burned silver white. Something ancient had awakened within her. The power once called the White Wolf Soul. Seol stood. Kuro stepped backward. For the first time, the general who had conquered half of Haneul looked afraid. Then Seol moved. She tore through the enemy formation with impossible speed. Spears shattered against her attacks. Swords broke. The snowstorm twisted around her as though the mountain itself had chosen a side. Haneul's surviving soldiers stared in disbelief. Moments earlier, their kingdom had been defeated. Now one woman was driving an army backward. Kuro roared and charged. Their blades collided. He attacked with overwhelming strength, but Seol moved like water around every strike. Again, 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 Kuro became desperate. What are you? Seol stopped before him. Her silver-white eyes met his. I am every forgotten soul you tried to destroy. Kuro attacked one final time. Seol struck. His sword flew from his hands. The great general fell. Across Mount Soryeon, Daejin's soldiers stared at their defeated commander. Then they ran. The army that had burned its way across Haneul retreated from the mountains. The kingdom survived. Weeks later, thousands gathered inside the capital to celebrate the woman they had once laughed at. Yoon Seol walked through the palace wearing armor made for her instead of armor borrowed from men who believed she didn't belong. Emperor Jin-tae descended from his throne. To the shock of the court, the emperor knelt before the former servant. From this day onward, Yoon Seol shall be known as the guardian commander of Haneul. Cheers erupted throughout the courtyard. Seol looked around at thousands of people calling her name. She had imagined this moment during every lonely night of her childhood. Yet strangely, something still felt missing. Then the crowd parted. Two elderly figures were being escorted toward her. Seol stopped breathing. The woman's hair had turned gray. The man's face carried scars Seol didn't remember. Years of suffering had changed them, but Seol knew them. Her sword slipped from her hand. Mother! The woman froze. For several seconds, neither moved. Then her mother whispered the name she had been searching for since that terrible winter night. Seol? The commander disappeared. The white wolf disappeared. And the little girl from Pekso ran across the courtyard. Seol collapsed into her mother's arms as her father wrapped himself around them both. For the first time since she was 7 years old, Yoon Seol cried without trying to hide it. Spring rain began falling over the palace stones. Her father held her face between trembling hands. We never stopped searching for you. Seol closed her eyes. She had spent years believing survival meant becoming strong enough to need no one. But standing between the parents she thought she had lost forever, she finally understood something Master Bae had been trying to teach her all along. Survival was never about becoming a weapon. It was about living long enough to become yourself again. The kingdom would remember Yoon Seol as the guardian commander of Haneul. Soldiers would tell stories about the white wolf who awakened at Mount Soryeon. Kings would record her victory in history. But among ordinary people, another story survived. The story of a stolen village girl who became a servant who became a warrior, and a warrior who proved that greatness does not belong only to those born with titles. Sometimes, history is changed by the person everyone else forgot.